Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Preparing for Paper 2. This is part 3, where you and I get to do the practical. Firstly, let's recap on what we know about the business report so far. Firstly, we know that the purpose of the business report is to assist in decision making. We also know who the report is compiled for, and that is for decision makers. We also know the format. We know you must firstly start with who it's addressed to, who it's from. You must give your document a topic. You must write down the date. You must have contents, and then you must sign off. Now it's time for us to do an example of a business report together. We'll break it up into bite-sized pieces for now and learn to walk before we run. Soon we'll have you flying, hopefully. Let's look at this practical example. This is the question. You should have a copy of this that was given to you by your teacher, so you can either follow there or follow here. I'm reading right from the screen now. You should be reading from your papers. This gives you an indication of how we'll allocate marks, and we'll speak about allocating marks in the next lesson. You must make sure you use the correct format. You must include an introduction and a conclusion. You must use headings and subheadings where appropriate. You must use correct business terminology. You can't speak the way you guys speak to each other on the rugby fields, on the playgrounds, in the clubs. The content must cover all aspects of the question. For our bite-sized sample for today, there's only one aspect to the question, so you shouldn't have a problem there. Substantiation, you must justify every statement you make. What does it belong here? What value does it add? You need to back it up and substantiate it and link it to the question at hand or the problem. You must apply your theory to the case study or the context. If you give us a statement that would apply if we change the name of the business to another one, then it's too general and you fail to apply it specifically to this context. You must implement creative problem solving instead of just giving us theoretical facts, and you must synthesize and sequence your work so there's a logical thread or logical flow to your work, and it's not just random sections appearing abruptly. Now the question says the following. Read the following sources and then use them where appropriate to answer the question that follows. Now the theme is the South African ride-hailing industry. Now I've chosen to keep the same question because you guys already had a chance to think about some of the factors that affect this industry. Source 1. Uber and Meter Taxi feud claims life of a driver. In Pretoria, the violent feud between Uber and Meter Taxi drivers has seemingly seen its first murder. You guys can read the rest, but you get the picture. Source 2 speaks about Taxify investigating a reported allegation that 2 Cape Town women were stabbed by one of their drivers. You can read the rest of that. Source 3 informs us that Taxify is expanding into the garden route. You can read the rest of that question by yourself once again. And Source 4 shows us a graph of the American ride-hailing market. You can see that Uber's market share has been declining somewhat as Lyft has been increasing. So already we can pick up from this that Lyft was able to successfully compete with Uber for customers, and they've managed to take some of the market share in the US, which already gets us thinking on the fact that if they can do it in America, then they can probably do it in South Africa. The final part of the question gives us instructions. We are required to write a business report to Lyft's Director of Global Business, in which we analyze the feasibility of setting up Lyft's hailing or ride-hailing business in South Africa, and in specific Johannesburg. In your report, you need to identify and analyze the challenges in the macro environment. That's an error. I was meant to remove market and micro environments. We're only looking at the macro environment. And for that, you guys must use a pestle analysis. Now, one important factor here is that we've been asked to analyze Joburg specifically. And I'm sure whoever's given us the instruction has their reasons. Maybe they want to start in Joburg and then expand. So it's pointless if your whole report focuses on Durban or PE when they've asked you to speak about Joburg. Now, as we begin our business report, we need to make sure we use the correct format. So who is it addressed to? Well, it's addressed to the Director of Global Business at Lyft, so you say so. Who is it from? It's compiled by Mr. Sandile Ngema, who is a Senior Global Business Advisor for Marist & Sons. What is the topic? I've distilled my topic to an analysis of the South African microenvironment in as far as it relates to the ride-hailing industry. So the person knows exactly what I'm talking about. If I just said analysis of the South African macro environment, well, then that would be problematic. In what context? There's another error here. It should be macro environment. Please just make sure that you change that in your pieces of paper on the questions that you've been given. The date, that's today's date, and then next is the content. First up in the content, we have our introduction. What are we analyzing? Well, we're analyzing the macro environment, and we said that in the introduction, we outline the key points or content areas that we're going to address without expressly saying, this report will, and once again, without restating the question or rephrasing the question, as you guys are often required to do in your English literature essays. Now, what do? We define the macro environment and we give it a heading. So there's my heading, the macro environment, and then I introduce the macro environment. I unpack the key content point, which is the macro environment. Both the macro and market environments form part of the external environment. The business has got no control over events taking place in the external environment, but it still needs to consider these events, and they must design strategies to adapt to the situations in the external environment. I've introduced the macro environment. Let's move on. Our next heading or a subheading is the pestle analysis. Once again, we introduce it and we explain its purpose. A pestle analysis, obviously each of the letters in the pestle represents a factor in the macro environment that could potentially threaten the business, or that the business may use as an opportunity to create or strengthen their competitive advantage. And then we begin the pestle analysis with the aid of subheadings for each of the subtopics or factors that are involved in the pestle. The first step we take whenever we answer a pestle analysis question is to draw up this table. Now remember that a pestle analysis is used to analyze the conditions in the macro environment. So whenever you see that the question is asking you to analyze the macro environment, you know that you need to do a pestle analysis. We start with political factors. Firstly, we must check and see if we can find any information on political factors in the information they provided us with in the question. In the question, I can't pick up anything that points towards any political factors. The next step we do then is to apply our general knowledge. Are there any political factors unique to South Africa that may impact on Lyft's business? This includes, of course, both negative and positive factors. From my own general knowledge, I've drawn out these two factors, and I would have put them into my table, and I would have gone through all the factors that have populated the table and put 2 political factors, 2 economic factors, and so forth. And I've gone to the next line and just fill that in until eventually I've got a full essay that is planned in my mind, and then I'll go from the table and expand it and write it out in full sentences that flow and that have headings and subheadings. Now this was just me giving it a try. I didn't get 100% in school, so this may not be 100% either. Our government is aware of our growing and worrying unemployment rates, and they have repeatedly said that South Africa is open for business and they are willing to help businesses that will create employment and reduce poverty and unemployment. This was evidenced by the effort of the Johannesburg Metro Police and the South African police in general when they went out of their way to protect Uber drivers who were being stabbed by meter taxi owners. Not stabbed, sorry, attacked by meter taxi owners, especially at the airports. So Lyft should appeal to the South African government by highlighting the number of jobs it will create when asking for support and asking for approval and an operating license. The other factor that I identified was the fact that the South African government, especially the Johannesburg local government, prides itself on Johannesburg being a world-class African city. Having an improved and a competitive ride-hailing market benefits their aims, as this will improve and modernize our transport system. And this is why they'll be likely to have the political will to protect the business from criminality. Lyft should highlight this to the government and the public when they apply for an operating license. We can see that both of these factors weigh in favor of establishing a business in South Africa. And so we mentioned that as a sub-conclusion. The next factor in the pestle is economic factors. South Africans are largely poor, and a large majority of us cannot afford ride-hailing services. Wow, we've been making mistakes here. Sorry, we cannot afford. This means that you can only target a small minority of the country for the business, and that limits opportunities for growth. And that's what you want as an entrepreneur. You want to enter a market where there is growth. This factor weighs against opening up a business in South Africa. Lyft should consider offering a cheaper version of their service, like Uber did with UberX, and then therefore you can appeal to a greater proportion of the population, and that gives you the option to grow your business. Another factor that I can think of is the fact that South Africa does not have the funds to invest in a good public transport system. And as a result, it's still difficult for people to rely solely on public transport to get to where they need to go on time and safely. This means that the need for ride-hailing services will continue to exist until the South African economy grows to a point that the government can afford a better integrated and more reliable public transport infrastructure. We can clearly see that this weighs in favor of establishing the Lyft business in South Africa. And Lyft should highlight how unreliable the public transport system is when they advertise to make people aware of the benefits and convenience of using their service. Socioeconomic factors. You guys need to go back to the first lecture that I gave you guys that gives you the kinds of things you can think about when you're thinking about socioeconomic factors. Because chances are the same socioeconomic factors will have an impact on just about any business. There's evidence of Uber drivers being attacked in our question. This tells us that the ride-hailing business is a dangerous one because of the socioeconomic reality of high crime rates in South Africa. This once again weighs against opening up the South African business. Lyft could put in measures to protect their drivers by employing security at hotspot areas and installing cameras in their vehicles. Once again, remember, if you go and look at the requirements of a pestle, the requirements of business report, and if you look at the table I gave you, you must suggest or offer up strategies or plans of actions to either prevent the harm that could be caused by this factor or to take advantage of the opportunities that are brought about by this factor. And that's why I've included that strategy at the end of each factor. There's a lot of crime in South Africa, which makes it not safe for us to take taxis and buses because our chances of getting mugged while walking to and from the bus or taxi are quite high, which makes us more willing to pay a premium in order to ensure our safety by using things like Uber that pick us up where we live and drop us off exactly where we're going. This means that there'll always be customers who are willing to pay as long as there are high crime rates. Lyft should therefore consider budgeting money towards advertising the safety benefits of using Lyft, and that's a strategy that I propose. Technological factors. Many South Africans have got smartphones, and Lyft should capitalize on this, as people enjoy the convenience of using an app to call their transport and the beauty of not having to carry cash. I personally can't think of any other technological factors, but if you can think of one, then you must include and discuss it. And of course, offer up strategies. There was an investigation some time ago, and Uber was being accused of hiding behind the word partnerships in order to pay their drivers less than a living wage. So Lyft must make sure that their payment structure with their drivers is within the law and they don't end up with a legal challenge against their payment structure before they enter the market. Rather prevent instead of finding a cure. Uber and Bolt have been operating in the country for a number of years without running into any legal trouble. So that is a positive factor for Lyft. Carbon emissions are obviously always an issue when it comes to vehicles and other plants that release harmful chemicals into the environment. So Lyft should possibly consider electronic vehicles when they enter the market. This will give them a competitive advantage over their competition because it will appeal to the environmentally conscious customers. And then most of the information provided to us relates to the market environment. And we are not asked to do a market environment analysis in this question, so we can't really use it. If, however, we'd been asked to do a market analysis, we could have looked at the fact that Taxify is expanding, which tells us that the current level of competitors is quite robust and the current competitors are expanding aggressively. They're not just sitting on their laurels, they're not being complacent, they're trying very hard and aggressively to expand their market share, which means that anyone coming in will have to employ a strategy of possibly lowering their prices to try and steal some of those customers away from the already existing competitors. But like I said, we haven't been asked to analyze the market environment, so there's no need for us to go into that analysis. But I thought I'd get you guys thinking about that already. And once we are done with our analysis, it's time for the conclusion. Remember now that you've already been making sub-conclusions. So all we do is highlight the key points that lead us to our final conclusion. And my conclusion goes like this. I recommend that Lyft enters the South African ride-hailing market. The high crime rates in South Africa, coupled with the underdeveloped and unreliable transport, weigh strongly in favor of a recommendation to establish a business presence in South Africa. Although crime is a real threat in South Africa, the police presence for now appears to be enough to reduce that risk enough to make it worth entering the South African market. You've given a conclusion, you've given a recommendation, you've answered the question, and hopefully you've given them information that they can use to make a decision. Okay, since we've walked this journey together, it is now your turn to try and walk it alone. Some classes have been split into teams where you guys work in pairs. If you want to tackle this question in pairs, that's great. But otherwise, this is an individual exercise. You should have a copy of this question as well that's been given to you by your teacher. Read the question and then do your own PESTEL analysis type question based on the information that you've been given here, and read the instructions carefully so you know what problem you are trying to help them to solve. You know what decision you need the decision maker to make. Thank you very much. Your teachers are there to help you should you get into trouble. Good luck and happy essay writing. I'll see you again next time for our next example. We will be looking at a market analysis.